The Magnavox Historical Preservation Association has been actively engaged in preserving and telling the story of the Magnavox Company. To achieve this goal, they developed and opened an exhibit on Magnavox in 2011 in Greeneville, Tennessee. In addition, we have continued to acquire artifacts and memorabilia and are having conversation with former Magnavox employees. From its beginning in 1911 in California, where Magnavox invented the loudspeaker, the company grew to become a leader in sound reproduction. The company headquarters moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana in the mid-1930s and continued to expand in the fields of home entertainment and military equipment, playing a key role during World War II. Following the war, the company grew rapidly in the field of consumer electronics. In 1947, they located a new plant in Greeneville, Tennessee to produce radios and cabinets. This operation flourished in the 1950s and 60s, producing a variety of products, including record players, radios, and televisions. In 1974, Magnavox was acquired by North American Philips, who continued operations in Greeneville until 1996. I am George Collins with the Magnavox Historical Preservation Association, and I'm pleased to have with me today 3 retired Magnavox employees: Bill Bradley, Ed Jeffries, and Brumley Greene. Welcome, and thank you all for taking the time to share some of your history with us. First thing I'd like to do is ask you when you worked at Magnavox and what your general responsibilities were. Bill, would you start?
Well, I started when I was 17 years old, right out of high school. Not many got to go to work at 17-year-old. My dad happened to know Clifford Henry, so he managed to let me go before my 18th birthday. Started out unloading boxcars of lumber, and we would stick the lumber and get it ready for dry kilning. And so I worked there and went into the Army in March of that, 57. Came back, wound up working in the Cabinet Division. They put me on the night shift, and I refused to work it, so they had me bid on every job on the board, which I did. Third day, they called me and told me I had to come work on night shift for at least 4 hours, or else they was going to have to fire me, so I went in and worked 4 hours on night shift. Wound up getting on a rub line and field line, which was probably the worst job in the cabinet business. And your fingers would get sore from hitting. Back then, they had a lot of grills and cabinets, and you'd have to get all that feel out of it. So from there, wound up doing a little cabinet assembly. Kept bidding on anything come on the board, so managed to bid on Stockman and radio TV part of the business. And the first radio line that I stocked was a line where the chassis went into a piece of plywood frame that was cut out. They'd ring the bell and the operators would slide it down, one operator. There was probably about 20 operators on the line at that time. And this was at Plant 1 upstairs. Remember the first mistake I ever made was put the wrong dial wheel in the radio. It took us about 3 days before we caught it. Of course, you learned then that you compared parts a little closer than you thought. You know, I looked at them; they both looked the same. I think one was right and one was left, or something like that. But they wound differently. So later on, wound up going to. And back then, you know, it was very seasonal. It was always 60-40, sometimes even worse than that in bad years when things didn't sell well. But you'd always get laid off, especially if you were a young employee. The year my daughter was born in 1961, I worked 6 weeks, I think, that particular year. So you wind up getting in all kinds of business, and as luck had it, just, you know, the timing, I kept coming back. And so I spent 8 years on the clock. I stocked just about every line in the house. I worked on the organ 2 different occasions. I worked on the multiplex line, which was the forerunner of the stereo before it became true stereo. Worked final assembly, worked for Ed once in final assembly, then I worked for him again in materials after I had the opportunity to go into management. I went in as expediter, external expediter for chassis, and Ed came to be my boss just a short time after that. We basically developed our own MRP system. The idea was at that point in time, we operated under a job order system where you supposedly had a package of all the material and it was ready to run. Well, in any kind of business, you always have problems and shortages and things don't go according to plan, so you get backed up. Somehow you got to keep the business going, so you would substitute. So we developed, Ray Crum and I were basically the MRP system. We contacted purchasing. We had 2 purchasing departments at that time, and that was about the 1964's time frame that I'm talking about. We had a Greenville purchasing department that worked for one group, and then we had a Fort Wayne purchasing department. So Ray and I had analyzed the schedule and determined what shortages would be. Then we'd contact the buyers, either Greenville or Fort Wayne, and then try to make sure the parts were there on time. So did that for about 2 years. Then I went into stores as store supervisor, and all this was taking place when we were really in a growth period. Color TV was starting to boom. We were outgrowing the space. That was at Plant 3 at that point in time, and we had material that would get lost because we didn't have anywhere to put it, and we'd spend half our time looking for lost components to keep the place going. So I spent about 1.5 years there. Then I went into scheduling. Spent a couple years as chassis scheduling, and again, those were trying times. Sometimes you'd have quality problems. You'd back your chassis up. They wouldn't tie in with final units. You always had to mate everything together. Your cabinets, your chassis, your various other components had to meet the final line at the right time. And almost all of it was manual. You know, you relied on people's experience, expertise, and we had experts everywhere, people that could look at color codes on resistors, quote the part numbers, same thing with capacitors and various other things. So we went through the early stages of transistor chassis, both black and white and color. And it was always tough in the beginning, making those things run and getting them debugged, and tend to always be overestimated as far as volume and what your market would be. So then I left scheduling and went over, took the internal expediting group, and I spent about 1.5 years there. I was working for Herb Stearns. And later on, then Herb left, and I became materials manager in Greenville. I was probably the youngest materials manager that had ever been there, and that I know there was some concern. We even went to Lineweber, Mr. Lineweber, and he gave me the okay to take a chance on me because of my age, but they did. And so I was materials manager for 20 years. And most of that time I worked for Art Hobson. And when Art went to Mexico, then I went to work for Ralph Price, and he became the materials manager for Greenville. So, and I spent about 1.5 years, 2 years working for Ralph at that point in time. Got to do a lot of things that getting away from the burden of keeping the factory running with shortages and all the other things. Give us an opportunity to go in and work on the systems. Well, in the period I worked for Art, we got into JIT, we got into a lot of things. We even got to where we got conveyorized trailers and hauled conveyorized cabinets timed from the warehouse to Plant 3. We'd offload them in a trailer, let's run the trailer off electrically and stage them, and saved a lot of time, took a lot of labor out of it. And we kept working on inventory accuracy. We went to barcoding, we went to kitting to reduce the amount of material that was ahead of the lines, just gave the operator what they needed in a little trailer. We looked at convincing them to go to combining labor grades, getting rid of all the different job codes we had in materials, and went to one job code and just used the people interchangeably wherever we had an opening rather than lay them off. And that we gave them labor grade to entice them to do that in one of the contract negotiations, so that was simplified things. So we wound up to, ultimately, we had inventory accuracy at about 99.5% just right after I left with all the things we did. We even had give people two-way radios where they could communicate to get parts just in time, and it turned out Magnavox became a world-class organization. We had people come from all over the world to look at what we were doing and how we were doing it. We also traveled everywhere. We went to all the automotive plants and went to IBM several times, and people would share with us what was going on in the country, what they were doing well. We copied, plagiarized, stole, whatever terminology you'd like, and brought it back and incorporated it. We basically stole the barcoding, or we copied the barcode system from the automotive people, and that became the standard really for the electronics industry after a while, after we were the first one to put it on paper. Let's see, from there, in '89, I went into manufacturing as a sales manager, and I was over the A product. I wound up with oh gosh, I don't know how many, about maybe 4 sales working for me. At one time I was producing about 13,000 units a day just for my part of the business. That was back in that peak period that Dick was talking about earlier when we had all the employees. Running 3 shifts, and to really get appreciation for things, you need to work in a 3-shift operation at a time or two, and
That's 13,000 TVs a day.
That I was building just in my part. At that point in time, we were building more than that.
Gotcha.
I had one line was producing 4,500 units a day, 1,500 a shift, and a couple others at 1,000 a shift. And you know, we lived on cost savings there toward the end from probably the late mid-'80s, or maybe probably even before that, but we were always working on cost savings, getting cost out of the product.
So when did you retire?
I retired when they shut the door and quit sending me a check.
And when was that?
97.
97.
Yeah. And I was too young to retire, but they wouldn't pay me, so
I understand. Okay. Ed, introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Ed Jeffries. My father is one of the original starters of Greenville Cabinet Company, which was the forerunner to Magnavox. He and Mr. L.B. Kinney came to Tennessee in 1946, and between them and Mr. Fryman rented a warehouse from the Alston Company up on Hardin Street, which became the first Greenville Cabinet Company, and that was in very early '47. I went to work for the company. I was in high school, and I went to work for the company then 2 years later as part-time as a DO student, which is diversified occupation, and myself and a young man by the name of Guy Wilhoit was part changers. We'd come in at noon, and any of the radios or TVs, well, we started off in radio and graduated up to the TV, but any parts that needed to be changed in it, they had them sitting on the floor, and we changed those parts. I did that for about a year and a half, and I moved into the PMI department, which was a purchase material inspection, and that was an inspection on all the incoming components at the old Plant 1, and that was in the upper area where the TV was located at the back dock off of Irish Street. From there, I moved up to supervisor, stayed there, and moved from supervisor there to Uncle Sam's Air Force in 1953. Spent 4 years in the Air Force and came back to Magnavox in '57. January of '57, and they didn't have a place for me, but they found out that before I left I wasn't too good at doing whatever I done, so they made a place for me. And they put me in final assembly, and I run the final assembly line 1 for about 3.5 or 4 years, and from there I moved to Morristown in the very early 60s with our plant manager down there was Mr. Ray Hibbard, who had been my superintendent at the over final assembly. And I became materials manager there, worked there for 3 years, and again, I evidently didn't do too good a job. They had to find something else for me to do. They moved me back to Greenville as scheduling manager for the Tennessee operations, working for Gene Adams, who had worked for me before in the stores division when I was at Plant 2. And I stayed there until Mr. Thornton, Thunder Thornton, Jim Thornton, we called him Thunder because he'd rain all over you. Took me to Arden, North Carolina. Well, first of all, I went from Morristown to Arden, North Carolina, and early 70 or 71, don't remember the exact date, but then I stayed at Arden as material and production control manager for 5 years, and at that point I was at the top of my labor grade and felt like that they couldn't find anything else that I could do, so I left the company and went in the private sector on my own. And my father and Mr. Kinney came down in 1946 and started Plant 1, and my dad stayed with the company until 55, and Mr. Kinney had passed away in 54, I believe it was. So that was, I went through knowing about 350 or 400 people that I sat down and tried to jot down everybody's name. In fact, Mr. Greene here was one of the fellows that helped keep me on the straight and narrow. He and Mr. Clifford Henry, and of course I think they got Mr. Seitz after me every once in a while. But that was about the extent of my tenure with Magnavox, and I did real good. I owned Knox Brick Company, division of Chattanooga Brick and Tile, and Chattanooga Brick and Tile from 1976 to 2008.
2008, all right. So Brumley, he says you kept him on the straight and narrow.
Tried.
Thanks, bro.
So when did you come to Magnavox? And
I really became acquainted with Magnavox in late 1947 or early 1948 as a result of, I was still in high school, and they were playing baseball in the summertime back in those years, and Magnavox had a baseball team, and because my brother was running the baseball team and working at Magnavox, I spent one summer there playing baseball for them. But I really became associated with them in August of 1957, and that was as a result. I had, of course, graduated from high school and fought a police action in Korea and pulled that service time, played a little pro baseball, and finally ended up getting a college education and come back to teach in the Greenville City School System. Was there for 2 years, and then in August of 1957, due to the fact that Magnavox was in an unbelievable expansion program, and it was in the days of soldering irons and needle nose pliers. So they had an unbelievable training program. And because Jim Merlin, who was the training director, was a full-blooded Yankee, he wasn't getting along too well, as I found out later. So they talked with me, they being personnel at Magnavox, and wanted to know if I'd leave the teaching and coaching profession and come and be their training director. I did that through late 1958. That was basically the end of the training. We had all of those people. We'd bring some weeks 300 people in August in a warehouse with no air conditioning, no nothing, and set them down at a mock station that they're going to be in front of when those sets are going down the line, and at 110 degrees in there, and try to teach them how to do the needle nose pliers and the soldering irons so we get those sets together. And as you've probably heard before now, one of the things that Mr. Fryman, who was no question the one that was the force behind Magnavox from its very beginning till he died, he would let a lot of things go. One thing he would not let go was you had to do a good job. You had to produce a good product. It didn't make any difference how you got there. You'd better turn one out that you would be proud of. So we ended up training those people. Ed in materials probably, or in any of those people in materials. I still remember teaching the color code. We had transistors back in those days that you had to know the color code to be able to put it in there. The engineer that would help design all these things for the training program, Charlie Doty. I'll forever be indebted to him because he taught me how to do everything so far as getting these people ready. And those people that had to know that color code, bad boys rape our young girls, but violent gives willingly. That's how we taught it. That was a color that would tell you, if you knew that code, you knew what ohms went in there, so you could put those transistors in there.
Good training technique.
Good training technique. Still remember.
Right.
I know what those colors for, what that stood for, every one of them. So.
It also told you what the group number was on the part.
Right. Told you where you could find it. So that was one of the things that I did for the early years. Then, due to an economic shutdown, we didn't do much more with needle nose pliers and soldering irons. So the next big training operation was in the 60s, and that was completely different. So I didn't have anything to do that. I went from the training person to hourly personnel for a short time, and then moved from there. In early 1960, I went in as wage and salary administrator in charge of all salaried employment for the Magnavox Company of Tennessee, which was responsible for about 10,000 employees, of which about 2,600 were salaried employees, everything from CEOs to clerk typists. One of the things that saved my life in that, we had a job description for every job, every salaried job in the Magnavox Company of Tennessee. Had it on paper, right? We didn't use much of anything so far as advertisement or anything. We were basically a word of mouth, and we recruited all over the world, but it was basically through people that had been associated or were wanted to be associated with Magnavox. One of the best things I had in the recruitment area was being able to be good friends with Bernie Tremlett, who ran the cabinet division. Bernie come out of General Electric. He was an apprentice for 7 years in the General Electric program in Syracuse, New York. We later on recruited in Syracuse, New York. We recruited on the floor in the manufacturing area. He knew when these people were going to be vested in their insurance program. 15 years they were invested, and we recruited them right off the floor, brought them to So, but again, it was word of mouth. Mr. Fryman, he advertised by saying that anytime we wanted anybody, we went out and hired him. Of course, that didn't help our situation in trying to hire these people within our range of salaried employment. One of the big problems I had during those years when Hal Barry was running the accounting division, he said we had to have some good accountants and we had to bring in some good ones, and we was going out here and we were going to bring some in that were just out of school and pay them more than those people that had been with us for 4 or 5 years. So we had a little disagreement in that, and I said, well, when you do, I'll be dead. So we went from that. Hal Berry was later gone, and I was still there hiring people. So, but that was some of the things. But we didn't have to go to agencies, or we didn't have to go. We hired people by going and contacting them. And while I was in the salaried employment, when I was personnel person handling hourly employment, as when we opened Plant 3, we had sets setting in the floor, plumb out the back door, everywhere you could set one. We had them that couldn't get through tests. We had everything in the world going wrong. So I made 3 or 4 trips through Kentucky, up in Hazard, Harlan. We'd been in that area because we recruited a world of people through LMU, through our baseball program. And we had all kinds of salaried employees of that, but we went up there and got some testers and some repairmen, and we got all that cleaned out. So that's some of the big things that really happened. And I stayed with the wage and salary program, and really, you got to understand that from 1963, when Plant 3 opened in color television, made every color television that Magnavox made was made in Plant 3, every one. From 1963 until Fryman died in 1968, we were the #1 electronic profit organization in the entire world. I mean, other people are operating at 3 and 4%. We were operating at 13 up to 19%. Because I think because of the way we marketed the product, we went directly to the dealer. We shipped to the dealer. We didn't go through, put them in warehouses.
Let me interrupt you one moment with your chronology there. I've talked to people on the line, I've talked to truck drivers, I've talked to top management, line management, staff such as yourself. Everybody has the same opinion of Mr. Fryman. Can one person have that kind of effect on the environment and culture of an organization, regardless of what perspective they have contact with him on? Was his leadership that pervasive?
Well, to me, there's no question that he was Magnavox, because he was a design engineer. He designed the loudspeaker, and he had that. And the loudspeaker that was designed by Fryman as before Magnavox was born. But that's basically the same principle that's used in every speaker system in the world today, still today. So he had that, and that was his baby, and he would not let you put out anything that did not have perfection in audio. I don't care what else might be wrong. It better be out. And I've seen him kick units off the line, get that junk out of here. We're not shipping that.
That even pervaded your work as a personnel trainer.
That's exactly right. It had to be the best in audio. It had to be the best. It couldn't be second best.
Okay.
It just couldn't be there. And
Ed, did you want?
That was one reason why Magnavox, or why Greenville Cabinet Company was started, because of the people here in this area of Tennessee. Was, I think at that time, Pet Milk Company and maybe Austin Tobacco Company. And there was a nucleus of really smart people and good people. And of course, with Mr. Fryman's leadership, just like Brumley said, I've seen him kick a unit off of a final assembly line in the floor because it had a scratch on the front of the cabinet. And it scared us all to death. I mean,
You got the message, huh?
We got the message. He was probably as close to being a perfectionist as I've ever run across.
Very high standard.
And from that, he shifted it right on down to folks like Brumley and Mr. Henry and my dad and Mr. Kinney and Mr. Bradley here, and it came on down to all of us.
You got the message.
You had to give it your best, and if you didn't give it your best, it wasn't good enough.
I think there's one other thing here, George, too, that he had a knack for, and that was picking the right people. He had good people early on in the right places. Mr. Lineweber was known as Mr. George, and he was president of Tennessee operations, and he ran the business where everybody respected him. And another tough taskmaster, and the Bernie Tremlett, as Brumley mentioned, in the cabinet division, and just every part of the business. The guys that ran the purchasing for him in Fort Wayne and all the others were top notch. And
I didn't mean to interrupt your work chronology there, but that point you were making has just so permeated other conversations. I just wanted to zero in on it. So take us from where I interrupted you on down to your retirement.
Well, to further facilitate that, to show you how much he was involved and how much he was Magnavox, period. In addition to the fact that the loudspeaker is still so, Magnavox compiled an unbelievable, astonishing record of first in the industry, basically because of Frank Fryman. They were the first people to build an electric phonograph, first hi-fi, first single dial radio, first portable stereo, the first transistorized phonograph, first solid state radio phonograph, first fully automatic color TV, and the first 1- and 5-year warranties in the industry. Again, because he built a quality product. You get no way you could have a 1- and 5-year warranty if you're not going to build a quality product. And those things, they just permeated through Magnavox, unbelievable, until his death. And at his death, I still firmly believe if Frank Fryman had lived 10 more years, Magnavox would still be operating in Plant 3 today. But at his death, everything went downhill from that time on, and it soon became evident if you're around Bob Platt a while, you better find you someplace to go if he's going to survive in this world. And one other thing that
Who was Bob Platt?
he was the one that replaced Mr. Fryman. It was originally placed by a 3-person thing, and then it got down to Bob Platt. Don't get me started there. That got me out of the world.
So there was definitely a cultural change. When Phillips took over. Well, it was Mr. Fryman's death, and then
Mr. Fryman's death. It started. I mean,
and the Phillips acquisition just sped that along, or
no? The Phillips acquisition. It was way down the tubes when Phillips acquisition. They'd been trying to sell it for a couple of years.
Yes, that's how they got acquired.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So, and it needed to be so because it was going down the tubes. So, it had to happen.
Brumley had to live through Mr. Pratt. I didn't. I left before he came along.
I didn't live too far along. I found a
part of
place to
that
go.
too was wrong decisions made at that time. That's the point when we made a decision to stick with the hybrid chassis rather than go transistor when everybody else did.
Can we interrupt your chronology again?
Yes,
and this transition, and I think you alluded to it a minute ago, this electronics transition from what I call tubes to transistors.
Right.
That had an effect on training.
Oh.
What was the other effects? What effect did it have on the line and operations? And what was you mentioned hybrid. What was the hybrid?
Hybrid was tubes and transistors, a combo.
Together.
Yeah, so it wasn't fully transistorized, and everybody else went in the industry. Left us hanging out, and then...
So you were the only ones using half and half?
I think maybe another one or two that didn't survive with us, but that was really the downfall of the company. Prior to that, Magnavox was really a glamour stock. It was in the Fortune top 50 for profitability. And
so why, when you went transistor, didn't you go full tilt?
The engineering wasn't quite ready. And at every model year, basically, you're changing models. Latest, greatest, and, the newest innovations. And so we were just behind the curve on that particular time. Also, we went to slide switches, and they had a major reliability problems. It's where the switches would slide back and forth. That
As
was all
opposed to a toggle or rotary switch?
Prior to that, everything was rotary. You know, you were basically into 1 or 2 knob tuning with
Right.
12, 13 channels plus UHF and rotary switches, but slide switches were a major disaster.
Unproven technology, poor suppliers, what?
Unreliable, and there wasn't that many suppliers. We got them from Stackpole up in Virginia. We'd fly planes 3 or 4 times a day just to keep lines running, and they weren't always good.
That's the reason Scott's doing what he's doing today.
Yep.
Yep.
And we dropped Scott all over the country to pick up parts. He and Ed, we kept folks out late a lot of times from when they were coming home, drop them down to pick up parts to run the next day on.
Meet them at the airport and take them to the line.
Was there a disconnect between the engineering folks in Fort Wayne and line operations people in Greenville? Once Mr. Fryman passed, is the period we're talking about.
The disconnect was we went from Frank Fryman running the operation, who was a design engineer, was an engineer to the nth degree.
He knew what he was looking
He
at.
knew exactly what he was looking at and what he wanted to happen. We went from that to a peanut counter who was an accountant. The only thing he wanted to look at was what the stock market price was.
The bottom
and
line.
What's the bottom line? How much are we making? It didn't make any difference what kind of set you's building or how you got there.
Or quality.
That just killed us. I mean, killed us.
But the other issues that take place too, you get into this high growth period where all of a sudden you're doubling volume, you're doubling productions, you're outgrowing your organization, you're outgrowing your talent, and all those problems come into play.
That's one of the times you need your strongest leadership, though, when you've got that kind of normal turmoil going on.
Well, you had that strong leadership
Yeah, we had it with
down
Fryman.
on the level that us guys were
The
on.
operational
Yeah,
level.
on the operational level. But when it got up into the engineering group and some of the higher ups and our illustrious leaders out of Fort Wayne after Mr. Fryman passed on, I mean, it did it 180 degrees.
How long were they in this hybrid period before they went all transistors?
Just 1 or 2 years.
Just 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, it wasn't long.
Doesn't take long, though, to
No.
trip and fall.
Years time, it's kind of like your health. It can go downhill in 6 months. So
And we had as much growth prior to the transistorized situation as we had during the transistor.
Probably more, didn't we?
Yeah, we were growing leaps and bounds back in the hybrid, before the hybrids situation, because we were training people. We were adding thousands of people every year.
let's say we built plant 3
Yeah.
due to that volume. You know,
Right.
we outgrew plant 2 and built plant 3, and even had plans on the board to build another plant. You know, Art was designated as plant manager X there for a while. And then till those other things happened, canceled the need for it.
And you mentioned the tubes to transistors, the hybrid period, and design leadership issues. A lot of change going on in the purchasing and cultural, what's the word I'm looking for, what people wanted to buy, lifestyles, maybe they wanted more portability, more apartments, less big homes, etc. Did the company, you feel, respond to those changes adequately?
I think we tended to underestimate the
Yep.
Japanese, and that basically we gave them the transistor radios in the beginning, and we were sticking with 17, 19-inch. Then they moved into 17-inch. We let them have that to concentrate on the higher ends. The cabinets, you know, that's where really we were making our name, is in the higher end, and the cabinets and the furniture product. Back then, people bought TVs because they were a piece of furniture as well as an entertainment center. So we kind of got those niches because they were more profitable, and eventually you get to the point where you know, it switches to tabletops, plastic, and we were still, like automotive industry, we stayed with the high end a little bit too long. And they got a big handhold in the market during that period of time, in my opinion.
And when Phillips came in, you know, we had, like Brumley said a while ago, we had, I think, 5 or 6 cabinet plants, and we had 3 3 or 4 electronics plants, and first thing you know, we had plant managers. We started closing plants, and we had plant managers stacked up to where if you wanted to ever be a plant manager, you better go somewhere else, because you ain't going to get it here, because you got 3 in front of you that's already been tried.
Right. So the changing marketplace was also an effect on this.
One thing.
You said a minute ago, if Mr. Fryman had passed away, lived another 10 years, Magnavox would still be running something in Plant 3. Do you think Mr. Fryman, in your opinion, I know there's a tremendous amount of respect for him, would he have been able to adapt to the changing marketplace?
Oh, I think he was already changing to the marketplace.
Yes.
I think we were in that mode.
Right.
And especially with technology, let me point out one other thing, that when the decision was made to build Plant 3, and we would consolidate color marketing of color TV, the move was made that we'd consolidate the commercial division of the Magnavox Company of Tennessee, moving everything. We had, up until that time, Fort Wayne handled all of our distribution services and our marketing. It wasn't handled in here. Mm-hmm. But with the opening of Plant 3, distribution services and all marketing and all crediting and everything was moved from Fort Wayne to Greeneville, Tennessee. One of the things that I remember very vividly, because I had come out of the Greeneville City school system, and because I've come out of the school system and worked closely with Tusculum College, in that move, the Greeneville High School, they had incorporated 2 key punch operator classes, had 12 in each class, 24 people, which we had agreed with them that if they would do that, they would put that in place. And it was pretty easy for me to do, because I was operating with Magnavox, and my wife was teaching at Greeneville High School in the business department. So
with had it in already.
With the student teacher that she had available, who happened to be at that time Kay Watson, who later became Kay Leonard, who was chairman of the school board. Mm-hmm. They got those 2 classes involved, trained 24 people in key punch. We hired all 24 of them. They went to Fort Worth for Magnavox, and we ended up hiring Kay Watson. She went back, and she was doing her student teaching. She went back and graduated and come back and worked as a administrative assistant to the distribution services man who was involved. She helped move that place down here. And then shortly, to show you the way technology changed, but Mr. Fryman was always up with these technology changes. Shortly after that, we didn't need key punch operators, we need something else. Yeah. The technology is changing so fast, rapidly, right? But he would have been right on top of that. He was right on top of it.
Interesting.
That's the original reason that Magnavox and Frank Fryman came to Greeneville, Tennessee, was because of the nucleus of the people that is located in Greene County and surrounding counties.
The workforce.
We not only, our workforce not only came out of Greene County, but Brumley, I'm sure, will tell you that we hired people out of Jefferson County, out of Hamlin County, out of Johnson City, Washington County, the whole area.
Marshall, North Carolina. People from across the mountain, North Carolina, just drive that snow and everything. They come to work every day.
Now, you worked till when? When did you retire?
I left Magnavox in 1970.
1970. All
That's
right.
2 years after, and that I stayed 2 years too long.
Okay. We've got that message in there.
And after he wasn't around to help me stay on the right street.
Then you went off the tracks.
In 1978, I bailed out.
Okay.
And we left poor Bill.
Yeah, I had to stay to pick up the slack there, y'all left.
History-wise, there's 2 things that you really need to understand. In the pioneering of electronics, there was an unbelievable number of companies out there. Back and when Magnavox, or when Pridham started the operation, before Fryman got involved with them and all of that, when that come into being, there was just a number of those pioneering people that were involved in electronics, and going to make their way in the world. And then when we get along, when Fryman died, Magnavox was number 3 in the world, and it wasn't but about 5 that were left out of hundreds that started.
I was surprised. I recently made a visit to Fort Wayne and finding out about the number of electronics plants located there, because it was the center of wire production.
Right.
And
Essex
all the
wire.
spinach of armatures and everything else, and motor wires and everything else, they all ended up there because all the swirl wire was made. It was fascinating. Even the first, the inventor TV, can't think of his name at the moment, but he had a plant there and so forth in operation.
The second thing that I think is really interesting about Magnavox, in the First World War, Magnavox, of course it was the forerunners of Magnavox, they suspended all operations, didn't do anything but military production. That's all they did. Second World War, they did the same thing.
Same thing.
And as a result of doing that in the Second World War, that's the reason Magnavox was in Greenville, Tennessee, because the young lady worked in Richard O'Connell's office in the big building, what is it? Washington?
Pentagon?
Pentagon.
Yeah.
Dick O'Connor or O'Connell?
O'Onnell.
O'Connell.
He
So
was
it's not that we had a Dick O'Connell
No,
played a
that's-
big role in Fort Wayne or something like that, didn't he? Something
Well,
like
that was, the O'Connell up there was Mr. Fryman's nephew.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's gone, and
You're
Mr.
talking
Fryman.
about- You're talking about Mrs. Crozier, who was here in
Yeah,
town and
yeah, that's
suggested to
she-
Richard O'Connell while in
because
Greenville, right?
yeah, because O'Connell was there. Richard O'Connor and Jerry Ungerow was on that trip looking for a place to build a plant. They stopped in Greenville because she had worked in O'Connell's office in connection with Fryman.
You remember Mr. Ungerow?
I
He
remember
had the
Mr.
ugliest nose of any man I've ever seen in my
He
life.
was right off of the. He was
Hey, get a little
right.
personal here now. We don't want
He was right off of the toe of the boot in Sicily. I'll tell you that right now. You better not mess with
But-
Ungerow.
A fine,
Good man.
fine. Well, anybody that had anything to do with Mr. Fryman
Was a good man.
That's right. He didn't have any, and he required that if you're not a good man, you ain't gonna stay.
That's interesting. One of the things that's been mentioned a couple times I've never really understood is the Phoenix Project. What was the Phoenix Project? I know what the Phoenix is.
It was
You
a
know, but
mistake.
what was the intent of it? What?
It was at that time, kids' games were coming along big dollars.
Okay.
And pinball machines, every drugstore on every corner had a pinball machine. Well, and I don't know who was the pappy daddy of the Phoenix Project. Brumley can probably tell us. But anyway, we wanted a bite of that. Well, we got a bite of it. We got a bite, and it cost us. It cost us in the rest of the industry. I mean, away from the TV and the stereo and the phono and
So it's diversification of
right,
product.
diversification, along with Odyssey. Odyssey was the same thing. That was a kid's game.
Yeah. Were there other products involved or research issues connected with the Phoenix Project other than these games?
Oh yes.
What,
Yes, that was-
what were some other?
Didn't Snyder run the Phoenix operation? Didn't he move in and take that over?
John Snyder,
Yeah,
I
wasn't
believe,
he-
but yeah, I think he was the pappy daddy of it.
And at that time, we were in a lot of trouble as a company. This was one
They
of the
were-
plans that was going to help, help
Bail us out.
survive.
Was this the late 60s again, early 70s?
Early 70s, be my
Yeah.
guess.
It was after Fryman's death.
Yeah.
So do you remember what some of the other initiatives were besides Odyssey and pinball?
See, we came up with a one-board chassis somewhere along about that period that I thought we called the Fighter. I don't remember the number, but it's basically everything was on one board. It just slid into the unit, only covered 13 and 19-inch color. And that was supposed to be the thing that would buy us more
And
time
that's-
and give us a low-cost entry into that business. And it did pretty good, but about a 1-2 year. program, and then it started.
Well, didn't we try some of that in Mexico, and then it ended up bringing?
I would think we may have moved part of that to Nogales, maybe in that Nogales time
we
period.
did move part of that to Nogales, and then ended up bringing half of what Nogales built to start off with back to Greenville and reworked it.
Okay.
I was working in materials at that time, and we had more trucks coming in with sets on it than we had with sets going out.
And this was stuff that needed to be repaired
Right.
before you could send it out.
Of course, one other thing that was real important, so far as I'm concerned, with Magnavox, especially in the early years, you're dealing with a workforce that had survived the Great Depression and survived the Second World War. They firmly believed in getting the job done. Mm-hmm. And they would
Quality.
work, they would help, they would do anything. If one of their side-by-side persons wasn't getting it done, they'd go help him and get the job done, get the product out that is quality, not just something to get out there. They lived through all of that, which wasn't worth a nickel.
Well, again, this area of Greene, of Tennessee, had quality people. I came out of Louisville, Kentucky, and you know, my dad spent years, he and Mr. Kinney both, with Mingle Company up there. During the war, they made boxes to ship, crates to ship airplane engines in. But anybody can drive a nail, but it takes a good person to be able to wire a TV set.
See, Magnavox brought the best jobs most of these folks had ever had. When they come here, no matter what the job was or how dirty or how bad, it beat hillside farming and a lot of other things. And I know I had an uncle that went to work as a spray operator. Best job he ever had in his life. He was able to buy him a car, but the job finally killed him. He wound up getting paint poisoning as a result of what he's doing because we didn't ventilate properly, and it shortened his life. But man, he loved Magnavox, and he loved that job. And it's happened all throughout the community.
They were able to send their children to school. They were able to get a college education for them, things that they always before that had been farmed through burley tobacco or pet milk. That's
Austin
it.
Company and pet milk was it.
That's it.
What was the relationship with the union over the years? Up, down?
Yeah. Brumley can tell you more about that than by being as close to the personnel department as he was down there. But
How would you rate it? Up, down, fairly
I'd rate it.
decent?
It was.
I mean, nobody's without problems. Let's set that up front. Yeah.
Anytime you get involved in that situation, you're going to have problems, but there were not problems that could not be solved.
we were able to solve them. That's what
They
it amounted
were
to.
all worked out. He didn't have that many, maybe one or two work stoppages, and they didn't last very long.
Did I read somewhere there's one work stoppage that happened during a vacation
During
period,
vacation,
so it doesn't affect
One of
work?
them did, right?
Such as signed the contract when vacation was over.
Okay, so it tells you one thing.
We unloaded trailers all during that period so shipping could ship, and then and we wound up losing our vacation. We criticized them for signing it and coming
I
back
mean,
to work.
if you were on salary, you
I understand.
you worked on the.
Give you a little anecdote.
But you had no major issues, it was
No.
regular
Well,
negotiations and contracts?
We had one major issue, and that was in Jeff County. But to give you a little sidelight of, you've heard a world of about Mr. Fryman and George Lineweber, of what all of that. There was a strike in Jeff County, and it got pretty rough for a time or two. So they had pickets, and we were not able to get anybody in or anybody out. Anyway, the personnel manager was Bill Alexander, and they told him he wasn't going in, so he drove his car, and they put a 2x4 through the windshield and like to got him. But Mr. Lineweber got all upset, and they wasn't going to let us take our trailer. We had shipping. We was fixing to take some units out of there, and they said, and George Lineweber. And anytime, I don't know if any of these people ever been in the office with George Lineweber, anytime he got a call with Fryman, I always did. I'd get up to leave. No, you set your fanny down right there. You're not going to wouldn't let you leave. So I listened to the conversation, and George told him, he said, I'm going down there and I'm driving that truck out of there. I'm
he
going to
did,
drive
do
it
it
out.
personally?
No, he didn't. Fryman told him, he said, if you drive that truck out of there,
I thought he drove it out.
No, he didn't. I'm telling you right now, he didn't. I know he didn't. Frank Fryman told him, he said, George, I'm telling you right now, I've done everything. And George's conversations, God damn it, Frank, we're not going to do that. He never did say, I'm not going to do that. He'd say, we're not going to do that. That was always his conversation with Frank Fryman. So he told him he's going to drive it down, and Frank Fryman, he said, I've let you get by with a lot of things, but I'm telling you right now, you go down there and drive that truck out, I'll fire your ass. You're gone. And he didn't go.
Well, now, George Lineweber was he was almost a Frank Fryman. I thought as much of that man as I did my daddy.
I have to share with you one story Bob Bosch told this morning. He's probably told you this. That when he worked in the Buda Road plant, the Magnavox plant up in Fort Wayne, that he was energetic and he'd stay late and work on things. One evening he was in the plant and had a whole bunch of TVs around him testing stuff and so forth and so on. Jander walked in and Jander said, what you doing? He said, I'm touching such. And he said, gee, I need a break. Can I watch this program? And he said, sure, I don't know, watch the program. So Jander sat down, propped his feet up, and was watching. Wasn't too long, this guy came in a bathrobe and slippers. And it was Frank Fryman, who had an apartment in the plant, which I learned, and
His
had a
apartment was
bedroom right there. He
and
slept,
design engineering is
he
right there.
slept right with his work. He came in his bathrobe and slippers and looking around and said hello to Bosch. And the other fellow said, what are you doing? He said, I'm taking a break. I said, oh, okay. He said, what do you do? He said, I'm a janitor. I clean up, so forth. And he said, okay, well, you're taking a break, huh? Well, okay. So he said, well, see you later, and walked out. About an hour later, the man in the bathrobe comes back. And the janitor's still sitting there propped up watching the program. And he said, what are you doing? He said, well, this is a really good program. I didn't want to miss any of it. He said, well, I tell you what, just so you won't miss anything else, tomorrow morning when you leave the shift, you go by to the front office and pick up your final paycheck. And walked out. And he said, the janitor turned to Bosch and said, who in the devil's that guy think he is? He said, that's Mr. Fryman. You aren't working here anymore. We have been talking an hour. I know that seems impossible, and you all have shared so much and your feelings and knowledge. In wrapping this up, any final thing you'd like to let people in the future know about your work with Magnavox or what you experienced? And
Do you want to start with me?
yeah, I'll start with you.
Well, in my opinion, it's probably the best thing ever happened to Greene County. We've never seen anything like it before. We'll never see anything like it again. It gave a lot of opportunities to a lot of people to not only grow, but get an education, meet a bunch of great people, become a world-class manufacturing and a high-volume manufacturing, which is a thing of the past in the U.S. When you look at the units that we produced, and we did become world-class. We were prepared to go for the Malcolm Baldridge Award. We won the Tennessee Quality Award. Just about everything we got into, we were some of the top players, and we probably became one of the best operating teams at the end that we ever had in the history of Magnavox. As good as things were, we got to where we really pulled together, and it was something marvelous to be a part of, to see 200 or 300 people pulling together instead of fighting. Now, you mentioned the union a moment ago, and the union was never real strong, but it gave people a voice and a place to air their complaints, and management usually worked with them and resolved them, as Brumley said, so they didn't grow real big, but they were able to work those out. But when we got to really pulling together, there wasn't much use or need for the union, because most folks weren't that unhappy.
I said this as a point of summary, but you provoke one last question from me. You all worked very hard, I know, to maintain and enhance the quality, getting the Baldrige Award and state quality awards, etc. And you really fought hard to keep production in Greeneville. What, in the final analysis, convinced Phillips to sell it and totally leave?
NAFTA. NAFTA was too lucrative. We don't know the full story on NAFTA, in my opinion.
NAFTA being the
North American Free Trade Agreement, and I think that was a death warrant for us. Prior to that, and I ran some numbers, we were competitive with Mexico because I was building the A product, which was the same thing that Mexico went into. We could deliver to the customer as cheap as they were when you started factoring in transportation costs. None of that mattered at a point in time. We dismantled our premier line, our highest volume line, the most innovative facility we had, and shipped it to Mexico, and then we continued on for a while after that. But we gave them that. We gave Mexico the expertise to get up and get started. We went down and trained them basically to do what we did. So I think NAFTA is the real
What's your
responsibility.
reaction to that question? In the final analysis, what led Phillips to conclude to get out of it?
I think Phillips was leaving Greeneville, Tennessee the day they bought the place. I firmly believe that. I think this had started in all manufacturing for maybe 4 or 5 years, or maybe even longer than that. Fringe benefits in the United States got totally out of line, especially in the automotive industry.
Mm-hmm.
All manufacturing started trying to get away from such a cost factor in their profit situation to the fringe benefits that they were having to. So insurance had become so expensive it couldn't handle it. So many vacations, so many holidays. Fringe benefits had just gone through the roof, and everybody was trying to get rid of them. And that's the reason for selling some of those planes. And if you look at it right today, that's the automotive problem. That's the reason the government's in the car business right now. Automotive people, their unions were so strong, they got the fringe benefits where you're overcosting the product.
Taking what you're saying and knowing the work that Bill and his people did, they in large part fought against the Phillips leaving here. As they would have left sooner if it hadn't been for quality work that was done.
That's
Is that a
exactly-
correct interpretation?
That is
I'm not
correct.
trying to make you feel good, but
Frans Bastiaansen, when he came in, he was the first Dutchman that come in and took over the operations part of the business. Prior to that time had been, let's say, Americans. And he told me once, and he was really one that got a lot of barriers out of our way that allowed us to do some of the innovations that we did in the latter years. And the Dutch gave us enough financing to do some of those things. But his comment to me was that when he went to New York, they told him his job was to come in and shut Greeneville down. But we lasted about 5 more years. He supported what we did from innovative and all the things that we were doing. It was very impressive to him and the Dutchman as well.
in your quality and cost control, you were bringing.
We kept
bringing
improving
in.
it.
Well, they weren't taking the little bag full of money, it was half full.
What final comment would you like to share with future generations who
Well,
see this? And
I'm a Magnavox kid from day one. So, without Magnavox, I wouldn't have had the success that I've had.
Yeah.
And I've owned my own company for 30 years, so sold it last year, and I'm fully retired now. I'm as good as anybody else.
I understand.
One other point, George.
Yes.
One thing we did was grow good managers. Anybody that came through that place and got into management and survived, wherever they went, they were a success. I don't know of any failures that went anywhere else, just to build on where Ed was coming from. But we did teach people to manage and be strong enough to go out and do what things need to be done. And we shipped people all over the world after they, completed their stint with us.
I sold my company in October of '08 for $2.5 million. And I started out with $16,000.
Understand. Hats off to you. Brumley, not surprisingly, I'm going to give you the last word. What's your
Drink my
reaction?
water first.
What would you like to say in summary to this series of conversations we've had today for the future generations?
I think probably 90 or 95% of the people, even in Greenville and Greene County today, just don't have a clue as to what the influence of Magnavox was on this community and this area. They not only become a world-class manufacturer for themselves, they spurred so many other things. Southern Electronics was operation down at years, a supplier for Southern Screw, come to Greenville because of Magnavox, because Doug Lukey was a personnel manager and he went to Southern Screw. They come back here, and of course that turned into Doler Jarvis and a lot of other things. Metals Engineering. Bill Graham left Magnavox because he couldn't stand Jim Robinson, who was the financial officer for the company. Bill Graham got mad because he couldn't give a clerk typist in Jefferson County, Tennessee, a $5 raise a month without approval from Jim Robinson in Fort Wayne, who's no telling how far away and had no idea what a clerk typist was or what they looked like. Or, same thing for his plant manager. He couldn't give his plant manager a raise.
So without he formed his own company.
So
Control.
He got with Bob Austin and there's just so many things. That's the reason Scott Niswonger's here. He came here as out of Purdue University. They had a 7-fleet plane operation in Fort Wayne. They finally moved the aerial commander down here and sent he and Ed Saylor down here. Ed was the pilot and Scott the co-pilot, and as a result of that, he ends up
With 2 planes down here.
I mean, it's unbelievable what a change that's been on this community because he's here, and it's just been like that. Let me tell you a little sidelight on Scott. There's probably not very many people know that Magnavox was because of we had plants in Florida, Mississippi, and everywhere in the world, over in the mountains and everything. We were going to buy a helicopter. They sent this company sent their helicopter in here with their pilot to show us. So Bernie Tremlett was going over to. They just built the Andrews cabinet shop over there. So Bernie was going over to look at it, and it ended up that Fred Quarles out of maintenance, or Greene, just because they asked him to go, he got on that helicopter and went with him.
That's your brother.
That's my brother.
Ralph Sanderman.
No, Ralph wasn't on that trip. No, he wasn't on that trip.
That they landed down at the Copper Station?
They landed because they got socked in, and Bernie, they couldn't get Bernie off of the roof because he was left there looking at the roof trying to get in, and they got started late and they got socked in weather. And they didn't know where they were or what they were doing. Fred Quarles happened to look out the window because he was raised in the Jefferson County area. He said, Copper Hill down there, they could see that down through the clouds. He said, we're on the wrong side. They just, you're going into this instead of going away from it. So he got them to turn it around, and they landed in a motel parking lot and stayed there all night. Stayed there all night.
Right outside of Ducktown, Tennessee.
And
That's where my wife is from.
When I left, Magnavox still did not have a helicopter, and I don't believe they ever had one until they folded the ship.
There was one that brought
the
the parking lot for a few days up there that sat up there for
That
a
was the
while.
same one.
Was it the same one that we're talking about?
Probably the same one.
Little quickie on Scott. Scott, when I was scheduling manager for the Tennessee operations, had to make 1 or 2 trips a week to Fort Wayne to go over schedules and what we were doing and all this good stuff. Scott was my pilot. He'd take me, fly me up there and fly me back. Well, my wife can make a sausage biscuit that's out of this world. Well, every time he'd take me up, Herb Stearns out of the cabinet division was my equal out of the cabinet division. So Evelyn would fix us a bag of sausage biscuits. Well, Herb and I would I'd usually get one and Herb would get two. Scott would eat the other 8 or 9.
I think it's probably an appropriate closing spot.
Closing spot.
I want to thank you all for your time and your support and commitment to helping us preserve this history. So thank you all very much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.